And that's not even remotely the entire story. It had many ups and downs, but I do want to pivot real quick and talk about my own story with the series and how I got into it and how it led to ultimately creating this podcast and this YouTube channel that I run. And the story actually starts a really long time ago in the summer of 1992. I have a cousin of mine who I visited regularly around this time. I would spend the night at his house just about every weekend. And there was this one particular weekend that I came over there and he was playing this game I had never seen. There's a lot of words on screen and numbers flying around. There were swords. And I asked him what it was called. And he said, well, this is Final Fantasy II, which is, as we know now, is Final Fantasy IV. And I was like, well, what is happening on screen? It was in a battle. Retrospect is a funny thing. He was in battle. And I couldn't understand what was happening on screen. I was, at the time, used to Mario Brothers, Mega Man, Sonic the Hedgehog, those kind of games. Whereas a 2D side-scroller platforming, now you've got these 5 people on one side, and you've got some gross-looking enemies over here, and they're sort of clashing, right? I did not understand. And he said, oh, do you want to play it? And I picked up the controller, and no clue what I was doing. Not a clue. I was attacking party members. I didn't understand the menu system. And then he explained it to me. And once he explained it a little bit, and for the life of me, I can't remember how he explained it, but it was enough for my 6-year-old brain to go, oh, I got it. Okay, now I see what's happening. And immediately, I fell in love with this thing. And then anyway, some time had passed, and we sort of moved on to other games. But I went up to him, and I was like, can I borrow this game for a long time? I think he let me end up borrowing it for like a year or something. Just a crazy long time. And in that time, I played it endlessly. I couldn't tell you how many hours I logged onto it. And I just fell in love with it. And then not long after that, Final Fantasy III for Super Nintendo came out, which is Final Fantasy VI now. And I remember he called me and he said, I got it. I got Final Fantasy III. And he was telling me how much better it looked, how much better it sounded. And I was like, how can you get any better than this? Which is Final Fantasy II. So I went over there, I don't know, a week or two later, and I saw how absolutely gorgeous the game looked. For my 10th birthday, in October of 1995, my parents gave me $100 and said, you can buy anything you want. So we went to this pawn shop, and at first I bought Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, which was $50. And we went there, and I bought Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, which I was a huge Mortal Kombat fan at the time. The first 2 I adored, specifically 2. I put Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 into my Super Nintendo, and what came on screen but a football game? My 10-year-old mind could not wrap my head around the idea that somebody opened it up and switched boards around, but I got this sort of, I don't know, super messed up copy of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. I can't even tell you what football game it was, which I'm not a fan of. I know that the sports game genre is huge right now. All the FIFA games are gigantic. But at the time, I bought Mortal Kombat 3 because I wanted to play Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. I didn't want to play a football game. And my dad took it back to the pawn shop and he said, we give no refunds. I don't know what happened, but ultimately, Dad did get a refund. I'm not going to question how. Thanks, Dad. Because I went back to the same pawn shop later on that day, and I walked up to the counter, and behind him was an in-box copy of Final Fantasy III. And it was $50. So I gladly forked over the $50 for the inbox copy of Final Fantasy III. I'm surprised that cartridge still works in any capacity. I'm afraid to know how many hours I've put into that Super Nintendo cart. That is the Final Fantasy game that really got me into not only RPGs and gaming as a whole, but it also got me into a lot of musical aspects and what game music could do to your emotions as you play through a lot of these titles. I remember learning how to harmonize on my own from these songs that played during this game. And I remember it having such a big impact on me as such a young fella. And I didn't want it to end. I never wanted it to end. And at the time, no other game was this big to me. No other game would I spend 50 hours playing through it. One playthrough. Mario World, you give me an afternoon, I'll have it done. This was like, you had to dedicate a week, at least, to even get anywhere close to being done with it. And it was a very, and I don't know, it was because I was just 10 or because I was fairly impressionable at the time. I can't tell you how super in love with this game I was. Every aspect of it The music played in perfectly to how it looked, to how it played. All the characters are super cool. I just adored it from beginning to end. I didn't want it to end, and I didn't beat it for a long time because I didn't want it to end. But of course, finally you do sort of go through it and you get it done, and then you watch the credit sequence and it's really long. And I went back through immediately and started a new game and played it again. And I did that over and over and over. And actually on my wall, just to my left here, I have a framed copy of Final Fantasy 2 and 3 for Super Nintendo. Not because I simply own those copies and they just went up on the wall. Those actually are the two exact copies that my cousin owned that I first played. This love of the series never stopped. Fast forward to about 2001, I just turned 16. I was working at a Burger King where my mom was the manager of the whole thing. And she's the one that got me the job, blah, blah, blah. So I had this extra money floating around. Not a lot. But a fella I went to school with was selling a copy of Final Fantasy X for a PS2. And I bought it. Here's the problem. I didn't have a PS2 yet. So I've read through the manual probably 40 times. I think I bought the strategy guide along with it. Or borrowed it and just never returned it. I've still got it over there in a stack of strategy guides somewhere. But I mean, that's how crazy about the series I was. I bought a copy of Final Fantasy X, I'm talking months before, because my birthday's in October, and I got a job not long after that. I didn't get a PS2 till I think that next December, 2 months later. So I had, around 2 months of holding this copy of Final Fantasy X, reading the manual, reading the back, looking at the photos, going, what is this game? I just want to play it. That's all I want to do. And finally, 2 months later, it happened. And that credit sequence of that game, I brought up credit sequences earlier. I had a really, really funny story about credit sequence in Final Fantasy X. So I was in high school, and I had a girlfriend at the time. And I remember specifically, very early, I woke up very early to play Final Fantasy X before school, because I was at the final boss. I was at Sin. It was a long and lengthy battle, and I finally did the last attack or whatever it was, and Sin started dying, and I was like, oh crap, I have to go to school. I have to go now. So I hit the pause button, and I thought, well, after school, I'll come back and watch the credit sequence, and, that'll be a super cool thing I do after school. During school hours, my girlfriend at the time comes up to me and she says, do you want me to come over to your house after school? I have nothing to do. And I was like, yeah, sure. Of course. That would be great. Not remembering that I had this game paused. So we get to my house and I see my TV still on with the game paused. So I was like, oh yeah, by the way, real quick, I'm just going to watch this credit sequence. And I think... Let me look this up real quick, because I really think that Final Fantasy X had one of the longer credit sequences. Just doing a real quick search, it looks like it's 15 minutes or so. And so for 15 minutes, this girl just sat. And I was just on the floor, sitting on the floor, just completely enthralled in this thing. So imagine that, if you will. We weren't dating for very long at that point. And here I am, sitting on the floor watching the end sequence of Final Fantasy X.